Thanks. Hi, it's great to be here today. This is my first visit to Bangalore, first visit to India. The scale of India and Indian app developers is amazing, and it's been incredible to be here this week to actually see that scale in action and to speak with developers. I'm looking forward to continuing to do that today. But first, I want to talk about three things today. Things that we've been doing on the platform recently and will continue to do. One is focusing on the users, what users need from the platform, especially around protection of their privacy and data. And for all of the users, over 2.5 billion users across the entire planet. Next, I want to talk about things that we're doing to help developers become more productive and make it easier for them to write these amazing Android applications. And finally, I want to talk about distribution, because it's great to have an application, but isn't it even better to be able to actually get it out to your users? So first of all, let's focus on the users. What are we doing to protect their data and to make it more transparent how that data is being used on the platform? So we'll talk about some privacy changes. Specifically, I want to talk about some of the recent changes that we've made in Android 10. And it's important to know these are changes that we made for the user that need to be made to make it safer for all the users that do affect behavior on the platform, which means developers need to deal with this stuff. It means it becomes work for developers, but it's really the right thing to do to make sure that the users have the right experience on all of their devices. So these are some of the changes that we've made. A lot of the changes in the last couple of releases have been specifically around the area of location. There are obvious ways to get to location and be able to track the location of users, and there are some unobvious ways, and we've been shutting down the ones that are unobvious and indirect. So for example, my favorite one is photos. When you take a picture, it's fantastic that you can find out where that picture was taken. You usually want that, right? When you share that photo, maybe people want to know where that photo was taken. But if another application gets access to that photo, then they also have access to the metadata of the photo, and they can then indirectly find out where the user was at that time. That's probably not what the user intended when they took the picture. So now, with the scope storage changes in Android 10, when you get access to a photo, the metadata is redacted so that we don't transparently give you that location information along with it, unless you have the location permission that the user has granted. In addition, we have background application, location access. We've changed this to a tri-state, so now it's not just does the user deny or accept that the application can have access to the location, but they can also deny or accept that they can have that location access while it's running in the background as well. We required an extra fine location permission for some of the communications APIs to make sure that they have the right level of permission that the user is granted to access that. And we've denied access to ProcNet, which was a backdoor of getting location information. If you can find out information about the networks that the device is connected to, then you can derive information about where those networks are and therefore where the user is. We've also made some more general non-location privacy changes, such as contacts affinity. So through the right permissions, you can find out information about the contacts, but you can no longer get access to how recently those contacts were actually contacted. We've been making changes in the last few releases about non-resettable IDs. We do not want it to be possible to get a non-resettable ID for the hardware. That device may be shared between multiple users, or maybe the user is going to resell that device and pass it along to someone else, and it just doesn't make sense for applications to lock into a hardware ID that really isn't associated with a particular user. We've also done something that makes sense. Clipboard data should only be shared between the foreground application the user is actually using and the keyboard that needs that information. We have camera metadata that shares indirectly information about the device characteristics. We don't want to share that directly anymore, so you need permissions to access that. Scope storage was a huge change in Android 10. So this makes it possible to protect files from applications that really shouldn't have access to it. So by default, your application only has access to the files that were created by your application. With permission, you can also get access to audio and video and images that were created by other applications. And then with an additional location information, you can get access to the photo metadata if you need that. If you need access to arbitrary files, then you need to use the storage access framework, which essentially uses the system file picker to make sure that the user is involved in that decision about exactly what they are sharing with your application. We've also had a big change to background activity starts. So you could previously be running something in the background that could then launch a foreground activity in the foreground, pops up in front of the user. Sometimes that makes sense. Imagine a dialer application, a phone application. Well, when the phone rings, obviously you want that application to be able to come to the foreground. But what if that application running in the background is just popping up an ad in front of the user? I'll give you a couple of examples. You could be using maps to navigate along, and then all of a sudden an ad pops up and goes full screen, and the navigation window goes to picture-in-picture mode, and it's harder to get around. Even worse is this example, which happened to someone a couple of weeks ago, where they were using a ride-sharing app. Actually, they were in a cab, and the driver was using the ride-sharing app, and then full-screen ads kept popping in front of the navigation application, hiding it completely. They missed their exit, and more importantly, they were swerving all over the road just trying to get rid of the ads, right? Not the right thing to do. The platform shouldn't allow that, so now we don't. In fact, in the last week, we blocked almost 18 million pop-ups of ads in front of applications. So just the right thing to do for users. It may require some work for developers to deal with this, but again, it's the right thing. So speaking of developers, what are we doing to make their lives easier? It's about, in the last few releases, addressing pain points. So Android has come a long way from the beginning. We have all these amazing capabilities. You can write these incredible applications. But it turns out it's not necessarily easy to write beautiful Android applications. So we've been working with the development community to find out what those pain points are. How can we make this easier for you? Developments much easier and more powerful. So Kotlin has come a long way. In about 2.5 years ago, we announced that it was a supported language for Android. And many developers were already using it at that time. We broke them occasionally because we weren't actually supporting it, but we got better at that. Now we support it officially. Many more developers have been using it since. In fact, 60% of the top 1,000 apps are now using Kotlin, and 53% of pro Android developers are using it. In addition to that, we've been working with JetBrains to sponsor this series of events called Kotlin Everywhere this year. Events all over the world, basically to train people on how to better use this language and integrate it into their development environment. So over 20,000 people have taken advantage of that, and over 1,200 just in India in the last year alone. A year and a half ago at I/O, we announced Android Jetpack, which was a suite of libraries as well as tool functionality and opinionated guidance to make it easier to build beautiful Android applications. We've had some new capabilities that we've announced for that this year. At I/O, we announced benchmarking, and that is now in release candidate status. This is about being able to track performance and integrate that tracking directly into a CI system, so you can track regressions or improvements along the way, and then make sure that you're doing the right thing for your application. We also have the new view binding stuff. If you don't like calling find view by ID, you no longer have to. And it takes the performance hit at build time. This is not a runtime hit. It doesn't add a lot of extra stuff to your application, and it makes it much easier to access the information that everybody needs for the views without the overhead that some other approaches use. And finally, we have the new Camera X library, which was announced at I/O and should be going beta in December. This is about making it much easier to build camera applications that scale across the entire ecosystem. It turns out that all the devices out there have differing support in camera capabilities and how you access those APIs. And instead of making the application developers deal with that on a case-by-case basis, we build these changes directly into the Camera X library to make it easier for you to use one single API that works everywhere. We've had a 10% reduction of camera-related crashes with people that have started using Camera X. We also have extensions in the Camera X library for things like portrait mode and night mode, and manufacturers like Samsung and Xiaomi and Oppo, Motorola and LG have committed to supporting these extensions going forward. Another thing that's important to note in the Jetpack suite of libraries is Jetpack Compose. So this is, you can think of this as the future of Android UI development, where we now have a reactive way of building UI. It turns out after 12 years, the way that we had of building UI was tricky and had gotten trickier just because of the way the architecture was. And we thought, how can we fix this? So we're using now a new approach and it is in developer preview, so it's pre-alpha. I wouldn't suggest anybody ship an application with this right now, but you can go get the bits and play with this in a couple of different ways, and I'll show you that in a minute. So here's a really, really small example of some code. So we have the simple function here. What we're doing with Jetpack Compose is we're separating the model, the data, from the way the UI is built. You can think of the application as taking the state of the application at any given time and then automatically just building the UI from that state without having to manage all the logic and declarative aspects altogether, which is the current approach. So if we take a look at a little more involved and interesting application. So here's an application that the team wrote. It's a simple contacts application. In each of the item, you have an icon and some text associated with that. And you can filter it with this edit text up at the top. So you type in there, it shows the contacts, pretty straightforward, right? So if we look at the way that you would implement that in the existing view system, in the existing UI toolkit, looks like this. You start out with the XML layout. Everybody loves XML layouts in Android, right? So you have a linear layout. You got an edit text where you type in the text at the top, and then you have a recycler view where all the items live. You also have a layout file for each of the items in the recycler view. Again, a horizontal layout with an image view and then a text view sitting next to it. You have the code to go ahead and find the views and then bind the listeners and the adapters there. And then you have a little bit more code when you actually need to do the filtering. There's different ways of doing this, but this is a pretty straightforward way of doing it. So all of that put together essentially gives you that functionality. What it looks like in Jetpack Compose is this, right? So that has the filtering functionality. Sure. Take a bow. So it has the filtering functionality, and it has the capability of sort of building on the current state of the data and then showing the UI as it exists at any given time as the data changes. So there's a new website that we built for Compose where you can learn more details about that. Check that out. One of the important things on the website is a link to the tutorial so you can work through an example and see how all these bits work. There's also a code lab that we offer with many more details. So I would encourage everybody to check that out and see where we're going with that. Android Studio, we've been adding many, many capabilities over the years, been working on performance and overall features and functionality. But for the 8 months coming up to 3.5, the team took a big step back and just focused purely on quality. So they did lots of fixes and performance work throughout the UI, far fewer freezes and hangs throughout the UI, really good fixes all over the place, including working on build speed. So this turns out to be the #1 feature request for the last 5 years running. I would guess forever, right? Everybody, what's the most important thing? Your build speed needs to be faster, right? The problem with build speed is the more improvements we make, the less it matters because everybody keeps getting more and more complex projects at the same time. So we're sort of fighting this war between the complexity and sizes of projects versus what we can actually do at the platform and the tooling level. But we've made some important changes recently, including incremental annotation processors and then integrating that stuff into important libraries like Glide and data binding and Dagger. We've also worked on resource processing and multi-module dexing, and we've just lately seen an improvement here. If you can sort of read this complex and interesting graph, we could track the average build time of projects in the last few releases, and it simply kept going up no matter what we did. But we've actually seen a reduction of about 24% in the latest release from the recent performance improvements we've been making. We've also come out with a new tool. This is in the latest canary of Android Studio 4.0, if you want to get this. You can visualize the times that are going into your build. So you can see whether there's an actual bottleneck. So maybe you integrated a new build config, or you've got a new module in there, and you can see whether that's contributing a problem. And then maybe there's a problem that you can address on your side instead of waiting for us to do more performance fixes. Canary, it should actually say Canary 3. The latest build is Canary 3 out there. So you can go grab that one. It's got several of the things I talked about here. So the new Jetpack Compose tooling. We've got desugaring for Java 8 libraries, things like Java Util Stream. Through the magic of the D8 and R8 compilers, we can now handle these advanced language features. We've got motion editor. So we've had this constraint layout is a rich UI layout system for Android, and then we have motion layout that sits below that. You could use that already in beta form, but you had to write a lot of really tedious XML code to do that. But it was built in conjunction with this editor, so now we have an early version of that editor out that you could play with to create rich animations in your application. And also the ability to use Kotlin and build files and have the editor actually understand the syntax and help you along there. Finally, I want to talk about distribution. How do you actually get your apps out there? So 18 months ago, we announced the new Android application format, Android App Bundle. We've had a lot of people start using that, so over 250,000 apps in production, and 25% of all active installs are using app bundles, with an average size savings of 20%, and some applications have actually seen an 11% increase in installs just because of the size reduction that you get from using app bundles. Some new things to take advantage of there are including making it easier to test these things, so you can now share test builds with the rest of your team without giving them access to the console. Excuse me. You've got the ability to still get to your old versions via a link, whether it's an app bundle or an APK. And you can also test offline delivery as well with fake split installs. And finally, I want to mention the Android Developer Challenge. So when the SDK for Android first came out, the first one, this is pre-1.0, we announced at the same time the Android Developer Challenge to spur the creation in the ecosystem of these applications that we knew developers could create. And it was fantastic at the time, and now fast forward 12 years and we're doing the same thing again. So we've got this idea, the theme for the challenge is helpful innovation with machine learning. And the way it works is you will submit ideas, we'll pick the 10 best ideas, we'll bring them to Mountain View, work with the engineering teams to get more ideas and figure out how to build these applications, and then we'll host the applications on the Play Store, or bring you to I/O, show the developers and the users what you can do with Android and machine learning on the platform. So go ahead and check out the URL for more details about the challenge, and please submit your ideas. And that was a really quick take through what we're doing for users and developers, as well as distributing the applications that you build. And now for something completely different, I want to bring up Dion, who's going to talk about what's new in Chrome. Thanks.